When he hears the booming tones of Big Ben, no English-speaking visitor feels a real stranger in London. The chimes from Westminster penetrate to the four corners of the globe, and Big Ben has become everyone's town clock. 2,000 years ago, Britain's tourist invasion began with Julius Caesar's Romans exploring beyond the boundaries of their civilization. Tourists always like watching the leisured classes enjoying themselves. And who are more leisured or leading a more idyllic life than the pigeons in their stately home at Trafalgar Square? Here are taxpayers and tourists vying to keep the wolf from their door. London's urbane charm and its infinite range of pageantry and interest lure some of the many thousands of visitors into trying to become real Londoners. But beneath its tranquil beauty, life is highly competitive. Still, you can find here many Australians who have achieved their dreams in music, ballet, theatre, the sciences, and journalism. And our story concerns a quiet Australian, an unusual species, say our overseas friends, who has found fame and fortune in a very different field. Coming home to his charming house in Surrey is Jack Brabham, world champion racing driver of the 1959 and 1960 seasons. Now, as an engineer, he has matched this great achievement so well that in 1964 he was awarded the Ferodo Trophy for the year's most significant contribution to motorsport. Not only is John Arthur Brabham still one of the world's greatest drivers, he's also a successful businessman and the only manufacturer driver of racing cars in the world today. It all started in this garage, from whose workshop came the first Repco-Brabham racing cars. As the tidings spread among enthusiasts that they could have their commercially built cars breathed upon by a twice-crowned world champion, business quickly outran workshop space. Today at Woking, Jack Brabham Conversions Limited specializes in high-efficiency tuning and development of cars to all-round racing standards of performance. Here, Jack has gathered a team of experts in the many factors required to bring a car first over the finishing line. Among his clients are some of the world's foremost drivers, and this Woking team has kept timekeepers busier on racing circuits throughout the world. Fine craftsmen need fine tools, and this elite corps at Woking have drawn much of their advanced equipment from Australia, where it was designed and built by the Repco Group. Included are electronic crankshaft balancers, precision valve placers, and electronic wheel balancers. The worldwide success of Repco-Brabham racing cars is due to an outstanding combination of mechanical excellence with magnificent handling qualities. These are to be expected from the creations of an engineer who has known personally the hair's breadth which separates fastest time from disaster and the bitterness of a last lap mechanical failure. The Brabham stand at the racing car show at Olympia each year is always busy taking orders for Brabham speed equipment. This is produced to drivers' requirements for every type of racing and sports car. In the factory, Repco-Brabham racing cars are coming off the production line at an ever-increasing rate. The Repco name has become linked with Brabham's over a long association, during which Repco has supplied him with components. During a recent visit to Australia, Jack said, "I congratulate Repco on their ability not only to manufacture racing components, but also to take over the whole maintenance of racing engines." Repco-Brabhams are not only custom built, but each is individually tested on a racing circuit by Jack himself. Within a few minutes after the car has arrived at the track, he takes off in his private aircraft to run the rule over his latest product. Thus, the new owner is assured that his Repco-Brabham is right, not only according to the jigs and gauges, but also in its personality and temperament, subtle qualities checked by the sensitive hands of the maestro himself. Well, that's the Repco-Brabham story in England. But these cars will be raced in many other countries, so let's follow their fortunes in the Tasman Championship Series for the 2.5-litre cars, held each year in the Southwest Pacific, where summer coincides with Europe's winter. There you will see Repco-Brabhams in action, piloted by Jack and other notable internationals as well as Australians and New Zealanders.
As winter ends the racing season in Europe and America, an increasing number of drivers join the Swallows for a flight south. New Zealand is their first stop, for racing and a look at one of the world's scenic wonderlands. Here, permanent glaciers and snowy peaks are counterpointed against strange thermal phenomena, where the molten center of the Earth seems strangely close to the surface. Rotorua on the North Island is the centre of the thermal district. For centuries, these pools have provided ready-made cooking, heating and bathing facilities, and now they're being harnessed to drive steam turbo generators. The indigenous Maori people, now well integrated into a biracial society, came originally from Polynesia by some incredible feat of primitive navigation. The weird, slightly hellish atmosphere is accentuated by a sulphurous odor. The great natural geysers blow with the regularity of a terrestrial pulse. Polynesian wood carving reached its peak with the New Zealand Maoris. The conventional human figure forms the basis for the most fantastic and elaborate designs. So greatly was art esteemed that the artist craftsman was accorded a high social position among his tribesmen. The Maoris are a happy people and still intensely proud of their ancestral culture. Besides cooking your meals in Rotorua's hot waters, you can catch them in the cold ones. Trout grow to phenomenal size in New Zealand's well-stocked lakes and streams. Captain Cook chartered New Zealand in 1769 and hoisted the British flag, and it became a crown colony in 1841. Today, Auckland has a population of nearly 500,000. In the various workshops, racing cars are prepared for the first race in the Tasman series to be held at Pukekohe near Auckland. Bruce McLaren and his team work on their Coopers, fitted with 2.5-litre Climax engines. These cars and many others have just arrived from England and Australia, and together with the New Zealand cars will provide motor racing fans with as fine a spectacle as they'll see anywhere. There's a happy picnic atmosphere about this meeting. The weather is ideal, and with many world-famous drivers taking part, expectations are high. Graham Hill is a favourite for the race. He is driving a Repco-Brabham entered by the Australian Scuderia Veloce team. Jimmy Palmer, the reigning New Zealand champion, will also drive a Brabham. And in another Brabham, Lex Davison, 4 times winner of the Australian Grand Prix. From America, Phil Hill, the 1961 world champion, and the current holder of the Tasman Cup, Bruce McLaren, are in the Cooper team. Jim Clark representing Lotus. Starting time approaches, and Graham Hill talks to team manager David McKay and Spencer Martin. Jimmy Palmer eases his way into his car and settles down, for in a moment he'll be off on a 109-mile journey or 50 laps of the circuit. 19 drivers, nearly half of them in Repco-Brabhams, are preparing to line up for the start. Number 8, Buchanan. Bruce Abernathy. Bruce McLaren. Number 5, Davison. Everyone is waiting for the starter to drop the flag. And away they go. But there's an incident. A few yards from the start, 2 cars collide and Rowley Levis comes to rest on the grass with a bent motor car. The rest of the field gets on with the motor race except McLaren and Clark, who on the second lap bump into each other on a corner. The Lotus retired with damaged suspension and the Cooper withdrew a little later with gearbox trouble. By the 15th lap, Graham Hill is well established in first place, with Lex Davison comfortably in second place. 4 laps later, Davison's car shows signs of overheating, and he slowly falls back, eventually to retire before the end of the race. Frank Gardner, driving the Brabham entered by Alec Mildren's racing team, now takes over second place, nearly a lap behind Graham Hill. Graham Graham races on, giving the huge crowd of 40,000 a demonstration of the relaxed style of driving which has made him famous. And just before the finish, he left Jimmy Palmer, who was in third place. After an armchair ride, Graham Hill wins the 12th New Zealand International Grand Prix at an average speed of 88.7 miles per hour. Australian Frank Gardner second and Jimmy Palmer in third place. All three drove Repco-Brabham cars. It's a pity that Jack Brabham could not have been here to share in the triumph, but we'll see him driving in each one of the remaining races in the Tasman Series to be fought out in Australia.
A month later, and the racing scene has shifted to Sydney, Australia's oldest and biggest city. Few of the world's cities have so beautiful a setting, or such a bridge. Narrow streets plus 500,000 cars equal one big traffic problem. But a comprehensive program of road improvement is underway, and traffic police do a good job. Thanks to his horse, this mounted policeman combines a long-range view with a sit-down job. Beautiful beaches and a long summer season make an expensive-looking suntan everyday wear for Sydneysiders. Surf, rolling in from thousands of miles of unbroken Pacific Ocean, has bred some marvelous swimmers, as well as life-saving methods that have been adopted by many countries. Jack Brabham's car gets a seagull's view of Five Dock before being tenderly touched down for the big Sydney meeting. And those tough watersiders get quite sentimental for a moment as they touch the car for luck. Bibb Stillwell's transport collects the Repco-Brabham from the wharf. In the workshops, the tempo rises as mechanics strive for better lap times on the big day at Warwick Farm. Finally, they leave their workshops and the cars and drivers converge on the Warwick Farm motor race circuit, laid out around one of Sydney's picturesque horse race tracks. Brabham's car is taken over for wheel balancing, and Mr. Tom Brabham is here to see that his son Jack performs well today. Repco's wheel balancing service is much in demand, handling the exacting job of balancing racing wheels. And you have to be even more careful when the car manufacturer himself is watching.
The crowd of 33,000 start arriving early to find out what is going on, get themselves organized for a thrilling day in the warm sunshine. Preparation for the race has even extended to the driver's boots. The cars are called to the starting grid. A Repco-Brabham Ford in the 1.5 litre brigade is followed by Jim Clark's Lotus, which, like 14 of the other starters, is powered by a 2.5 litre Coventry Climax engine. Jim Clark looks pretty confident. Perhaps he has a feeling about the outcome of this race. Amongst these 22 cars, drivers and mechanics, there are over a dozen Repco-Brabhams. In one of them sits Bibb Stillwell, who has been the Australian champion for the past 3 years. In a moment, they'll be off to cover 45 laps of this 2.25 mile circuit, so all eyes are on the starter. Frank Mattich makes a good start and leads Graham Hill and Jim Clark off the line. But by the end of the lap, these two squeeze past him, while Jack Brabham is in 4th place. Graham Hill is well in front of Clark, who lost the use of 3rd gear in his 5-speed box during the 3rd lap. Brabham on the 9th lap closes right up to and passes Frank Mattich. Meanwhile, Davison has retired with a broken steering wheel. The Coopers of McLaren and Phil Hill are also out. Jim Clark gets used to not having a complete gearbox and begins to catch Hill. Bibb Stillwell and his Repco-Brabham are comfortably in 5th place. Tyre wear on Jack Brabham's car is proving to be greater than anticipated, so he has to be content to sit in 3rd place, while Clark is relentlessly catching Hill. In front of the grandstand, there is activity in the pits during most of the race. Frank Gardner comes in to retire, while Kerry Grunt from New Zealand goes out to rejoin the race. Less than 10 laps to go, and Jim Clark takes the lead, setting a new lap record at 86.35 miles per hour in the process. Meanwhile, Jack actually stopped to look at his tyres, but continued without losing his 3rd place. On the final lap, Jack moves up to 2nd place when Graham Hill spun a few hundred yards from home and rejoined the race only after Brabham, Mattich and Stillwell, all on the same lap, had flashed past him. Unaware of Hill's problem, Jim continues to press the Lotus and is now over a minute ahead of Jack, who in turn is only 5 seconds in front of Frank Mattich. Jack has won this event for the past 2 years, but his luck was out this time. However, the cars he built have filled all 5 places after the winner. Jim Clark, world champion in 1963 and destined to become the champion in 1965, has shown today all the skill that has earned him these laurels. He overcame the early setback with his gearbox to win a hard-fought race and place himself in a very sound position in the Tasman Championship.
Melbourne, capital of Victoria, is the scene of the 6th heat of the Tasman Championship, the Sandown International Cup. Sometimes called the Detroit of Australia, with its big vehicle factories, it's the headquarters of Repco, and its 2 million people run motor vehicles in a ratio of 1 for every 2 people of driving age. 60 years younger than Sydney, but nearly as large, Melbourne has a more English atmosphere despite its wide streets. There are hotels of international standard, fine buildings, and you can eat in almost any language. State Parliament House. The great dome of this exhibition building has been an imposing landmark since 1880, and its colourful, well-kept gardens are a shady and tranquil resort at the northern end of the city. Jack and New Zealander Bruce McLaren have been admiring a vintage Bentley during their Melbourne sightseeing and are accorded by the press photographers. At this informal get-together, the press and radio people interview some of the visiting drivers who will be competing at Sandown Park, Australia's most modern combined horse and motor race track. Jack's mechanic is already on the job preparing number 4. Bib Stillwell's garage and workshop. Bib and his chief mechanic, Jerry Brown, look things over and decide the gear ratios need changing. Jim Palmer, with his father, who can pass on many years of motor racing experience to young Jim. Canvas village has been erected in the Sandown paddock, and as usual, the Repco Racing Service engineers are there to balance wheels. Wherever Jack goes, he's in demand for a quick chat or advice. This is not surprising, as 9 of the 14 starters will be driving Repco-Brabham cars, 7 of them powered by 2.5-litre Coventry Climax engines and 2 by 1.5-litre Fords. Number 7, Alec Mildren's car, to be driven by Frank Gardner, and Greg Cusack's 1.5-litre car, number 18. Jim Clark, Lotus Climax, number 9, goes to the starting grid. The organisers have provided attractive models to accompany the drivers to the start. Number 1, the Scuderia Veloce Brabham and driver Graham Hill. Kerry Grant. Number 5, Jim Palmer. Rowley Levis, his little Brabham fit again after the shunt at Pukekohe. Frank Gardner and yet another Repco-Brabham. Nearly 1/4 of the 50,000 spectators are in this magnificent grandstand, watching the organised confusion on the grid, while the drivers look as unconcerned as possible. 4 men with 5 World Championship crowns between them. Time to clear the grid and settle into the cars in preparation for 100 miles of racing or 54 laps of the circuit. All round the 2-mile track, the crowd gets ready for an hour's watching on their toes. Inner man permitting, of course. The tensest moments of all. It's heads down, and for the first corner, barely 400 yards away, turn left into a short straight past the pits. And up the hill at the back of the course. Bandstand Straight under Dunlop Bridge, and the leading bunch are already moving out. Clark, Brabham, McLaren, Phil Hill, Matic, and so on. Lap 2, Brabham in second place. Clark leads the field up the back straight. Clark holds his position until lap 6 when Brabham takes over. It's not Graham Hill's day, and he finally retires with overheating. Brabham and Clark swap places several times, but from half distance on, Jack has the upper hand. The battle is not over, as both drivers cut tenths of seconds off the fast lap times until Jack finally sets it at 1 minute 8.6 seconds, or 101.18 miles an hour. While this is going on, Bibb Stillwell works his way up to third place, but a faulty magneto slows him down to his finishing position of 6th, allowing Phil Hill, Bruce McLaren and Jim Palmer to move in front of him in the last few laps. One lap to go, and Jack goes down the main straight at close to 140 miles an hour, with Jim Clark barely 3 seconds behind him. There's no doubt about it now, it's Jack's race. The car never missed a beat, and the race took him just under 63 minutes, a fraction under the 100 mile an hour average. It's another one of those many happy occasions when Jack has come in to receive the garland and trophy. This win has raised his position in the Tasman Championship ladder, but Jim Clark's second place has given him an almost unassailable lead. Jack and Jim are joined by Bibb Stillwell. There is one more race in the series, this time across the water of Bass Strait to Tasmania. Jack's car goes aboard the ferry Princess of Tasmania for the overnight journey.
Little England Down Under and the Apple Isle. These are the titles that have been given to Tasmania, smallest state of the Australian Commonwealth across 200 miles of sea. Launceston is Australia's 11th city with a population of 60,000. Tasmania has a charm all its own and much unspoiled Georgian architecture. But beneath an apparent demureness is a strongly progressive government spirit which has pioneered such things as hydroelectric power and led the way in education and which actively encourages motor racing. In this modern spirit, Jack and Bibb Stillwell touch down in Bibb's private plane. Other private planes are making the crossing, and visitors are pouring into Launceston by airliner and ferry from the mainland for the Grand Prix. This is to be a 117-mile race of 26 laps over a real road course in the true GP tradition. The village of Longford lends its name to the only remaining true road circuit in Australia. It has a lap distance of 4.5 miles and is the fastest circuit in the country. It has a viaduct, a railway crossing, and the Longford pub. Once racing starts, you are not allowed to leave. So fill them up and watch from here. With Race Day Monday, a public holiday, many people come to spend the weekend here in perfect weather. Activity in the paddock for the last race in this year's Tasman Series includes Jim Clark improving his suntan. Once again, Repco have set up their racing service.
Shirley Levis's car arrives. Jack has a long talk with the Premier of Tasmania, Mr. Rees, who's a patron of the Longford Motor Racing Association and shows a keen interest in the Repco-Brabham cars. Meanwhile, Roy Billington is checking Jack's car and putting hairy, long-legged tigers in the tank. Jack meets old friends John Price of BP and Frank Hallam of Repco Engine Parts Group. It's time to form up on the grid, but it's always time for an autograph. Graham Hill, debonair as ever, is followed out by Bibb Stillwell and Frank Mattich, all Repco-Brabham 2.5s. The two Jims, Clark and Palmer. This is Jack's 6th visit to Longford. He first drove here and won in 1960, and although he holds the lap record at 114.64 miles per hour, he's not managed to win again, so he hopes today is the day. The field is made up of 2 Lotuses, 3 Elkins, 5 Coopers, and 8 Brabhams. Bruce McLaren's Cooper is in pole position. Down to the viaduct, McLaren leads Brabham, Graham Hill, Clark, Gardner, Mattich, Stillwell, and Phil Hill. Past the pub for the first time, the positions remain the same, but on lap 4, Brabham gets past McLaren as they enter pit straight. For the next 3 laps, Jack leads down the mile-long straight and round the sharp Mountford corner up past the pits. Lap 7. It's Bruce again leading Jack and Graham Hill under the viaduct. Bruce held his lead for 6 laps, but Jack, really on form, snatches the lead again. Down the straight, Jack is in first place. McLaren is not far away, with Graham Hill, Clark, and Phil Hill traveling in a tight bunch. At this time, Frank Mattich retires with suspension trouble, and Stillwell moves up into 6th place. These leading cars were recording speeds of up to 170 miles an hour on the straight. Jack and Bruce have changed places again, and the 2 Hills are together, Phil pressing Graham. Bruce first into Mountford, but Jack snatches the lead. Jim Palmer at speed. And Jack still leads. Once more, Jack has to pass Bruce, who somehow got in front. Bruce. Clark in 5th place. Graham in 4th, Phil having passed him. Bruce has done it again, and he leads the race. Into Mountford, Bruce slips past a slower car. Jack follows him on the outside. Traces of rubber, smoke. Bruce rounds the corner, but there's no Jack. Still no Jack. Apparently the inside car locked its brakes and touched Jack's rear wheel. Both cars going down the escape road. Jack recovers first and drives straight into the pits to check the damage. The quiet Australian's composure is sorely taxed. No structural damage, but the wheel balance weights have gone. Nothing daunted, he presses on in 5th place, and now with 10 laps to go, there follows the most exciting motor racing ever seen at Longford. Jack, Phil, and Bruce reduce the lap record time and again. Soon, Jack is in 3rd place. A final effort, and he's 3 seconds behind Bruce. By the skin of his teeth, Bruce McLaren wins the 30th Australian Grand Prix. Jack's final effort set the lap record at 117.4 miles an hour. Bruce's winning average was 114 miles an hour, only 3 miles an hour below the lap record, which gives some idea of the tussle he and Jack had. In winning today, Bruce has become the first recipient of the Lex Davison Trophy for the Australian Grand Prix, and with Jim Clark, who has won the Tasman Cup, they go for a triumphal drive around the Longford Circuit. The modified Coventry Climax engines used in most of the Repco-Brabhams during 1965 are fitted with Repco components in all the most highly stressed locations. So in Launceston, Jack Brabham visits the plant of the Repco Bearing Company. He's shown production methods and the constant research and development which have ensured freedom from engine trouble. Under the microscope, he sees the island structure of a Repco aluminium tin alloy, which combines maximum strength with minimum friction. This strip mill, which coats a continuous ribbon of steel with bearing metal, is the only one in the Southern Hemisphere, and it supplies coated strip for export to Repco factories overseas, as well as finished bearings for local and export markets. Jack has been using bearings from this plant for years, and everywhere they've been used, they've earned a reputation for precision and highest quality. .30 St Kilda Road, Melbourne. Back from Tasmania, Jack visits Repco's head office for discussions with the chairman of directors, Mr. C.G. McGrath, and his co-directors on an exciting new development in the very happy and fruitful Brabham Association. Now, with the urgencies of the tight racing season behind him, he has time for a round of visits to other Repco manufacturing companies and personal meetings with the men behind the continual development and improvement of Repco automotive components. It's a great time for engineering shop talk. Hardy Spicer Australia, a Repco company, has for years been producing special transmission joints for Jack's racing cars. It began years ago when Jack was getting into his stride to win the 1959 and 1960 World Championships. The universal joint crosses and yokes are forged at the Repco Forge Company. The forging's a machine, and the universal joints assembled in the Hardy Spicer plant. Repco-Brabham axle shafts are balanced on Repco-designed and built electronic balancers, which can balance rotating shafts up to 6 inches in diameter. Electronic sensors convert unbalanced vibrations into signals conveyed to gauges, which indicate what compensating weights should be welded to the shaft and where. One of the highlights of Jack Brabham's visit is the Engine Parts Group Laboratory at Richmond, Melbourne. Here, the research, design and development work on a new V8 Repco-Brabham engine has been going on for many months. For the first time, the new all-Repco engine goes on one of the dynamometers in the laboratory for tests of brake horsepower, torque, and speed capabilities. Revolutions mount to more than 8,000 a minute, but so perfect is its balance, there's scarcely a tremor in the plug wires. Already in production, these Repco-Brabham engines will soon bring a new sound to racetracks around the world. The Repco-Brabham combination has achieved enormous success already, And one of its most significant contributions to motorsport will be this full-scale project for racing engines.